more sinister forces at work. Join us as we explore three very strange cases of missing persons. People that, one day, were just no more. Are they still alive? Were they even real to begin with? Well, that's up for you to decide. What's fact or fiction?
The line that divides the factual from the unreal has long since blurred. The tales we once thought fantastical, now implanted as truth. To decipher verity from the imagined, you must break from the ordinary and consider a universe where the outlandish prevails. Can you expand your mind to see beyond our perceived reality? Can you decide what's fact or fiction?
How does one handle the sudden and mysterious disappearance of a loved one? For that answer, you'd want to look to Donald Bender. Once the happy husband to Elizabeth, Donald's world was turned upside down when, after returning from work one day, something incredibly valuable to him had gone missing.
When she picked up the phone, Kim's ear was met with the silent hum of a dead line. She listened carefully, wondering if the audio was just muffled, but there was nothing coming through from the other side. She checked the number again to make sure it wasn't one she recognized before hanging up. She never expected that the harmless dead-air call would drag her into a missing persons case. Across town, Donald Bender was finishing an overnight shift and was more than ready to return home to his family, his beautiful wife Elizabeth, and their two children. Walking through his front door, however, immersed him in a nightmare that no husband would want to find themselves in. Though their children were safe and sound in their beds, Elizabeth was missing. The house was in order, and there were no signs that she had been forced from the home, but something had clearly happened to the mother of two. Elizabeth wasn't someone who would carelessly leave her children alone in the house, nor had there been any signs that she was preparing to leave Donald. And yet he came home to an empty house. He wasted no time phoning the police, not once stopping to think that he would be the prime suspect in the disappearance of his wife. The spouse was always first on the list of possibilities, but Donald couldn't concern himself with such a fear. Elizabeth's whereabouts took priority. The investigation surrounding the sudden vanishing of Elizabeth kicked off at the family home, where it was determined that several gaming consoles, a digital camcorder, Elizabeth's phone, and a flashlight were missing. Left behind, however, were far more valuable items like Elizabeth's wedding rings and car. The scene was almost too clean for a robbery, save for a key that had been broken off in the front door lock. With no evidence at the house, detectives looked into Elizabeth's cell records, hoping she had made a phone call that evening. At 3 a.m., on the night Donald came home to an empty house, they uncovered a mysterious phone call. With nothing else to go off of, it was the only lead, and it seemed like the best that could be found in such a case. Just as quickly as local law enforcement felt they had picked up a trail, it went dead cold. The person that took the late-night phone call, Kim, not only knew nothing of the Bender family, she never actually spoke to the individual that had dialed the number from Elizabeth's phone. The vanishing of Elizabeth Bender rocked the small Tennessee town, confusing not only those investigating it, but the loving family that was left with no answers. Even the cleanest of home invasions or robberies leave some trace of evidence behind, but it was as if Elizabeth impossibly disappeared. It was a case that would never be solved, even after a decade of family members searching for the missing woman.
Do you think the tragic disappearance of Elizabeth Bender is a matter of an unhappy spouse looking for a way out? Did somebody harm the mother of two, somehow leaving behind no evidence of her murder? Of course, there's always that third option, where none of this ever happened. Leave your thoughts in the comments and be sure to vote by using the on-screen poll. And prepare for another mysterious tale. It was a night she would never forget. The last time Tamara Washington would ever sleep beside her boyfriend. It was their typical evening, nothing that would indicate Darnell Clark would vanish from his dorm room overnight. But that's exactly what happened.
The bed was empty when she woke up, Darnell's body no longer weighing down his side like usual. It wasn't like him to wake up before Tamara, but after their drinking binge the night before, it wasn't that much of a surprise. She waited, enjoying the comfort of having the bed for herself. But after dozing off a few times, only to wake up again to an empty room, she thought to check on her poor boyfriend. She texted his phone and was surprised to hear the notification across the dorm room, stifled under a pile of clothing. It wasn't like him to ever leave his phone behind, something that was often a matter of contention in their relationship. But Tamara still figured the hangover must have been enough to make him forget anything. After 15 minutes of browsing Instagram and no sign of Darnell, Tamara's concern started to grow. Despite knowing the argument it would cause if he walked in on her, she thought to check his phone, fearing she'd find some sign of infidelity. But the only notifications he had were from her. After an hour had passed, Tamara forced herself to go to his neighbors, people she loathed, but knew Darnell was closer to. Door after door, she was met with no answers, just shrugs and confirmation of what she already knew, that they both left the party together last night. But where had he gone since? Tamara, growing more concerned that Darnell would simply disappear, started to search his room, hoping to find some sign of where he had gone. To her dismay, however, she found his car keys, wallet, and even more distressing, his shoes. The 24 hours that followed were agonizing as Tamara sought out everyone that knew Darnell, hoping someone had heard from him. As she involved the local police partway through that first day, she did all she could to stifle her fears of the worst. 48 hours passed before word of Darnell's disappearance spread throughout campus and the small New York town surrounding it. Weeks turned into months, and Darnell's whereabouts never came to be known. Tamara and his family were forced to assume the worst, and the story turned into an impromptu late-night drunken walk that took him into the nearby forest. What happened after that? It appears only Darnell would know.
Where could Darnell have gone? Did he have an agenda nobody knew about? A secret stash of money and a bus ticket that would take him far from his college days? Or did an evening of drinking really lead the student to vanish in the dense forests of upstate New York? Or maybe this is a tale we spun up on our own. Let us know in the comments section below, and be sure to vote by using the on-screen poll. Alan Young wasn't your average criminal. He had a mind that belonged in the head of a Hollywood villain. To the average person, his plan may have seemed incredibly flawed, but it wound up being the stuff of genius.
It was the moment he had been planning for. It had been a pleasant flight thus far, the bourbon and cigarettes soothing the few nerves of his that were sparking. The plane was more quiet and housed fewer passengers than he expected, which worked in his favor. Once off the ground, Alan Young saw his opportunity. The young flight attendant nearest to him was still strapped into her jump seat, which gave him the opportunity to pass along the piece of paper he had prepared earlier that morning. Without hesitation, he handed it over to the attendant, who gave him a quick smile before pocketing it without reading it. Young, exasperated, shook his head and leaned in. These next words would determine the rest of his life, and so he outright said what he had tried to convey in writing. "Miss, you better look at that note." He gestured to her pocket. "I have a bomb." Her eyes went wide, but he could tell she didn't quite believe him at first. So she grabbed the note, taking her eyes off of him only to read the handwritten text. Just as he had said, the note also warned there was a bomb on the plane. Young took the note back and ordered the attendant to sit behind him. He was surprised when she asked to see the bomb, but also warned her to know he was serious. So he showed her. His intention wasn't to blow up the plane, but should things go awry, he was prepared to take everyone down with him. While he still had time, he made his demands. I don't want to hurt anybody. I'll be gone and everyone will be safe, so long as I get $200,000 in American currency, 4 parachutes, and I want a fuel truck waiting in Phoenix to refuel this plane. That's all. I don't want anyone to get hurt, but he patted his briefcase, and without another word, the attendant went to the pilot and relayed Young's demands. As Young expected, when the pilot contacted Phoenix Sky Harbor, the federal authorities were immediately called. He planned for this and knew that he could still get away with it. And to his relief, he did. He had heard of failed ransom attempts and, in his gut, was afraid he would be just another one. But it all went as he had hoped. The plane touched down in Phoenix with a fuel truck, parachute, and his money waiting, offered to him in 10,000 unmarked $20 bills, ready to be delivered. And before he knew it, after a tense 2 hours, he was back in the air, ready to pull off the last part of his plan, the one that seemed most impossible. Knowing there'd be no other escape, as the plane returned to the air, Young donned his parachute, opened the aft door of the craft, and jumped. Many would say it was an impossible heist, but many years later, some of the bills he lifted started to resurface. Though some of the money was found, to this day, Young is still at large.
This sounds like the work of a James Bond fiction, but does that mean it's fake? How could he have survived such a jump or escaped authorities after he landed? Someone must have had information on him, right? Well, while you decide, go ahead and vote using the on-screen poll and let us know your thoughts in the comments section. As for us, it's time to jump into the reveal.
Are you ready to find out if you can decipher between fact or fiction? Let's look back at tonight's 3 stories and find out which were born from reality and which were fabrications of the imagination.
Let's go back to the story of Elizabeth Bender, who mysteriously disappeared without a trace overnight. Do you think she would have been able to completely vanish without the slightest bit of evidence regarding what happened to her? If you thought this story to be too impossible to be true, well, you'd be wrong. On January 24th, 2006, one Teresa Butler disappeared from her home in Briscoe, Missouri, leaving no evidence behind. At some point before or after her disappearance, a call was made from her phone and, just as we told you, produced no results in finding her. What do you think of our second story about the vanishing college student? Did Darnell really walk into the woods, never to be seen again? Was there something more sinister at play? Actually, it's none of the above. There was no Tamara, there was no Darnell, and this story was the fabrication of our imaginations. Does the story of a vanishing hijacker sound familiar? Well, clearly a feat this great would be impossible to pull off on an American airline, right? Well, if you know your true crime history at all, then you likely remember the perpetrator of this act as being referred to as D.B. Cooper. After hijacking a Boeing 727 in 1971, the mysterious man ran off, or rather parachuted off, with $200,000 in ransom money and was never seen again. There were a few suspects, but the FBI ultimately suspended investigations in July of 2016.
How well did you do in tonight's video? Did you look past the deception of our world and define the off-blurred line that struggles to separate lies from the truth? Let us know in the comment section below. And should you find the urge to test your perceptions again, be sure to subscribe and join us next time when we ask you to decide what's fact